and welcome to On the Table. We are broadcasting on RTM Click and MyTV's Berita RTM channel 123, which is also live streaming on YouTube. I'm your host, Mohana Priya. On tonight's episode, in the next 30 minutes, we'll be diving deep into transformative ideas shaping the future of leadership. Joining us in the studio to explore the topic, Redefining Board Leadership, is Michelle Kaithi Lim, President and Chief Executive Officer at the Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia, or ICDM. Welcome to the program, Michelle.
Thank you, Mohana. Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
We'll begin with something really fundamental, foundation. What is board leadership? And could you explain to me who gets to become a board member?
Okay. Well, this is the 101 of board leadership. If you understand the structure of a company, who runs the company, the management, i.e. the CEO and the team, run the day-to-day operations. They are below the board. Yeah. The board sits at the top in terms of managing the company. It doesn't run the day-to-day operations. It provides oversight and more strategic oversight over management. So I always say the first most important job of a board is to appoint the CEO, right? And then after that, senior management team, and then it all cascades down. So the board position right at the top. This is our space in terms of ICDM, the Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia, where we try and improve the quality of boards, who sits on the board, the quality of decision making, and therefore to improve governance in terms of companies. Now, who gets to sit on a board? You obviously have different types of boards, different types of companies. If I just talk about public listed companies, what we call PLCs, there are specific requirements of independent directors who sit on these boards, and there are regulations which state how much of a percentage of the board needs to comprise independent directors, for example. Okay. So you have executive and non-executive. Non-executive are the independent. So the executives are like your CEO or your MD who sits on the board, but they are also the part of the day-to-day management of the company. That's right. The independents are the ones that provide that check and balance on the board. So the independent directors in large companies should form about 50% of the board. Okay. Normal board size is about 10, so about 5, let's say, should comprise independent directors, and these are the directors whom will provide that check and balance, as I mentioned, and that oversight over executive directors and the company as a whole.
Okay, so what is the role of board members? How would you describe the recent evolution on this role, and how is it defining expectations of board leadership today?
Yeah, if we look back, we start from the 70s where it wasn't as regulated. Okay. You find that people who sat on boards generally were older, retired from full-time work, were asked to sit on boards, and that has changed over time, obviously. So we're not, it should not be looked at like a retirement reward anymore. We talk about it as looking at a board position as a board career. Right. So for people who have worked full-time as executives, who are considering then what would they do post that, when they retire at 50 and what have you. They could consider sitting on boards, but we say that that's a different career. That's a different chapter in your career. And we're trying to professionalize boards at ICDM, therefore bringing in the right quality of people onto boards who can provide then the ideal oversight over a company. Because obviously you see now there are many issues in companies, governance on companies, the way companies are run. So it always starts with the right board. Right. And when you start with the right board, you need to start with the right composition first. So who sits on the board then? And whether they're they've got the right skill sets, knowledge, they've kept up to date with current trends, etc., etc.
Well, what are the right skill sets? I'm just curious.
There's no one size fits all in that sense. It
depends on the company, I suppose.
It depends on the company. You find the traditional skill sets were legal, accountancy, but it's gone beyond that now.
Okay.
I mean, you do need lawyers. For example, in a public listed company, you do need accountants. There needs to be certain qualified accountants who then would chair or sit on the audit committee, which is a prescribed statutory committee for public listed companies. So they will provide oversight of your finances and your internal controls.
Okay.
So certain skill sets are required. But for the majority, it could be anything depending on the strategy of the company and what are the skill sets that they need to fulfill and help them on that strategy and that strategic journey.
Okay.
So even those skill sets can evolve over time in the same company.
On that note,
yes.
About the skill sets, so we've got rising complex external factors right now. We've got the advent of AI and geopolitical factors right now, cybersecurity, fraud. Do you think the traditional risk management approaches are enough, and how should boards adapt to these emerging threats?
Yeah, so if I can put it very simply, all the list of current emerging trends and threats that you mentioned, AI, cybersecurity, even the pandemic. From AI itself, you talk about digital manipulation and all of that. These are so current.
Yeah.
So if you think about risk management, it needs to be more forward-looking. It needs to be able to assess future current threats, current trends that are impacting companies and how they perform. So as a board, if you don't apprise yourselves of current risk plus more, shall I say, less typical risks, more atypical risks. For example, as I said, digital manipulation, AI, how does that impact your business? Digitalization, how does that impact your business? Boards need to keep abreast of these sort of new current issues that impact companies.
So when we face these emergent threats, boards are making decisions and defining their legacy, the legacy of the company, and more importantly, diverting businesses from entering into the crisis in the first place. So as part of this crisis management, how can directors strike a balance between being decisive and maintaining strategic foresight when it comes to unpredictable situations like this?
Yeah, I think it is a constant challenge and battle. Boards, if they are kept apprised and they're on top of current trends and issues, they will be able to provide that oversight and the balance, as you say, because there is a challenge between oversight, which is reactive, shall I say, compared to being more proactive. And we're seeing now that the skill sets that are needed are more proactive oversight, less reactive, more. So when we talk about proactive, being more preventative in that sense, so that you can then prevent, as you say, or see crises coming and be prepared for that. And therefore, the board's role is not just sitting there and approving accounts anymore.
Right.
It is very, very proactive, and there's a huge responsibility, as PLC directors know. Yeah, the owners, and it's become very, very onerous.
The responsibility seems really big.
Yes.
Does that mean that board directors come with certain backgrounds, certain experiences already before they are appointed, or how does it work actually?
Well, they bring their specific or individual skill sets to the board. Let's say if you were a lawyer, or if you were an accountant, or if you were an entrepreneur, you bring that specific skill set to the board. We do also train board directors. So, for example, there are only 2 mandatory programs for board directors currently. We run them on behalf of the regulators, on behalf of Bersama Malaysia. There are 2 mandatory programs for PLC directors only. One when they first sit on the PLC board, that covers everything from fiduciary duties to listing requirements. The second one, which was launched quite recently, last year, it covers ESG and sustainability. and that's for all PLC directors.
Okay.
So there are certain skill sets that are mandatory and we are required for PLC directors.
Okay.
But again, if you're not a PLC director and you brought a certain skill set to the board, you would still need to ensure you're kept abreast
yes.
of current trends. So therefore, you would have to then yourself go and attend programs. We provide programs as well for non-PLC directors, and therefore they may avail themselves of those programs.
Do you think these programs should be made mandatory for non-PLC directors as well?
I think we have to balance between the mandatoriness, shall I say, and ensuring that everything is not being too prescriptive.
Okay.
Right? I think board members need to realize that certain things need to be prescribed, so there's a certain minimum that you would have to do.
Okay.
For example, if we link this to the number of trainings you do in a year, and this is something we should work towards, getting a minimum number of perhaps CPD or CPE requirements in order to renew themselves and be able to sit on the board year on year. I think that's something we should encourage because most professions do it, and if we're looking at professionalizing boards, there must be a minimum requirement to be able to do year on year. Currently, the BURSA, the listing requirements do state that they must attend training, but there's no specific requirement as to the number of hours, etc. Yeah.
I'm just curious, what happened before ICDM?
Well, there was MINDA, the Malaysian Institute of Directors or Directors Academy, which was actually set up specifically for the GLCs themselves, but then evolved over time to sort of cover and run programs overall. But that was, before before the Asian financial crisis and all this hit us, and before we've got, the various iterations now of the Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance, which is now increased responsibility of directors and companies to ensure, that they're on top of the governance game in that sense. So it has evolved over time.
So there was a big need for the setting up of ICDM.
Yes, and if I could go into that a little bit, when ICDM was set up, it was part of the Securities Commission strategic objectives from 2017 onwards. To improve governance in the market. So what they did was we had regulation, we had regulatory discipline, then we had the corporate discipline in the market with all the regulations in place. What was then lacking, or the last gap they needed to fill in that sense, was that individual or internal discipline of board members themselves. So that is our role, and that was why we were set up, to improve that internal discipline within companies themselves. Yeah, so we cover all the, from market to corporate to individuals.
Okay. Michelle, what kind of mindset shift do you think is needed for directors to lead organizations through the complexity of the threats that are prevalent today?
If I could just quote the ASEAN Board Trend Survey that we did earlier this year, and this is our second iteration of this survey. This round, we actually got feedback from management as well, and not just board directors. And it was quite telling in terms of it highlighted the trends that are impacting companies, and there are probably around 4 major trends, i.e. having the right talent and leadership, firstly. Secondly, being able to manage the current, geopolitical uncertainties that we have in the world today. Thirdly, it's operational and sustainable strategies within a company. And fourthly, board management relationship within a company. Now, these were the key threats that came out of this survey. And this is amongst ASEAN boards and from board members as well as their management team. And what we saw from the survey is that although there are all these key threats, there was a misalignment between board members and the management as to how they focused on what was important for the companies. So, for example, boards were still doing, looking at their operations and their strategies with yesterday's lens, if I could say that, outdated approaches.
Okay.
And just, looking at transformation, for example. I mean, post-pandemic, yes, we were looking at that, but it has moved on.
Okay.
Whereas the management were looking more at human capital, talent development, succession planning, balance at the workplace, et cetera, et cetera. So there was that misalignment. So what we're saying is, based on the survey, there are probably 5 action plans boards need to look at. Firstly is aligning their priorities with their management to make sure they are aligned, right? Not looking at things through yesterday's lens, so which means they need to keep up to date with current trends, current threats, as we say also. Improving that board management relationship, building up that trust, ensuring that they're aligned with how their management see issues within the company. Thirdly, also in terms of the board composition and the board architecture, as we call it, ensuring you have diverse perspectives on a board, because the management were also saying that they were lacking diverse perspectives, they were not challenging. There was too much groupthink, and that doesn't encourage better performance, because there's empirical evidence to show that where there's more diverse thoughts on a board, and we did this in a study, a diversity study in 2021, there's a direct correlation to improved corporate performance. So it's important that we have diverse perspectives on a board, so that there's that creative, and there's robust discussion on a board. Also, we look at board effectiveness, because the management was saying boards were not challenging enough, not looking, they're blindsided because they're not challenging, asking the right questions. So that's the 4th point. And the last point is on sustainability.
Okay.
Even though boards felt, they knew sustainability was important, management were questioning whether they had the required skill sets and knowledge to run that. For the companies.
And hold that thought on sustainability, Michelle. We'll be right back. We are speaking to Michelle Kaithi Lim, the President and Chief Executive Officer of ICDM. We'll be right back after these messages.
Don't work, it's okay. That is also very important, because your team needs to feel safe enough. They need to feel safe enough and assured enough, so that they are more willing and more bold to be able to innovate, to brainstorm, to think of new ideas.
And then,
And we are speaking to Michelle Kaithi Lim, the President and Chief Executive Officer of ICDM Malaysia. Thank you for being with us, Michelle. Let's continue our chat. Now, you mentioned mindset shift earlier, and you mentioned about the survey and the results of that survey. What would you say that the evolution of board roles require more hands-on approach as opposed to merely being oversight figures to better prepare for future challenges? How's that changing right now?
It has changed considerably through the last, I think, 20 to 30 years. We're seeing that boards, as I mentioned earlier, it's not a retirement job anymore. It's a very onerous position. Boards are providing oversight, yes, but they're not just figureheads. They have active participation in their companies. They need to be engaged with their employees. Therefore, it's not just sitting, at a board every quarter, every 3 months, let's say, and deciding on financials, and that's it. You have to know what's ticking within the company. How do you provide oversight if you don't know what's going on the ground? So we do encourage boards. I mean, we do board evaluations, independent board evaluations ourselves at ICDM. And we do advise, that boards do go to the ground, get to know their employees. This helps build trust as well. And if you think about it, currently through the ASEAN Board Trend Survey as well, we've seen that management are asking that boards be more in tune with the human capital, and they are your biggest assets. So do engage with your employees. The survey also shows that boards are required to be more open-minded, more humble in their approach. So therefore, have that open dialogue with your employees and your senior management. That helps build trust, and also helps you to get feedback from the ground on the challenges that we're facing, so that when you provide oversight, it's not, it's just what you think. It's actually on, you're providing oversight and providing solutions to what's happening on the ground. And I think that's very, very important now.
Now, you mentioned professionalizing boards, and ICDM conducts programs. When will it be mandatory for current and aspiring directors to obtain professional certifications, or do you think it'll come to a point where you will need a license to step into the role of boards?
If I may say, Mohana, I mean, currently, there's no minimum benchmark of standards for who can sit on the board, right? Okay. We do talk about skill sets, we do talk about training, we talk about mandatory training, but there's no minimum benchmark. If you think about it, your CFO needs to have certain qualifications, your company secretary needs to have certain qualifications, and continual education and development after post-qualification. Why not for board members? They sit at the apex of the company. So we do look at that. When we talk about professionalizing directorship, we're looking at a formal certification program, whether or not it's linked to a license, to operate on a yearly basis, that's yet to be seen. Ideally, it should be coupled with continual professional development, or CPD points, as we refer to them. But I think at the end of the day, while we're working towards that and working together with regulators, board members need to be prepared that this could be the eventuality, right? We need to get to a certain point where there's a minimum benchmark, so that there's a minimum standard when someone sits on a board, and therefore you improve the outcomes of governance on companies.
Okay. I'd like to take a bigger perspective, a look at the regional standards. And last year you initiated, or rather ICDM initiated, the ASEAN Directors Registry. Can you tell us a bit about that, and why is that important?
The ASEAN Directors Registry was set up against the ASEAN platform that we started a few years back, and that's also the platform where we do our ASEAN Board Trend Survey every 2 years. The ASEAN Directors Registry was an offshoot from, and we set it up, Malaysia, IE, and ICDM, because in Malaysia we run a Directors Registry at ICDM. And this is where we have a registry of board talents whom we can then place on companies. So we do board sourcing as a service as well. So we provide end-to-end service for companies, not just training. We place directors on boards from this registry. We also do thought leadership, coaching, mentoring, board evaluation, anything that helps improve governance on boards. So one part of that is the Directors Registry. And we found that this registry has a direct impact on the quality of boards, because we have very, very capable and very, very good talents in this registry. And if we're able to place them directly on boards, that already fulfills the basic composition of a board and helps to and then you build upon that. So what we wanted to do was to then extrapolate that onto the ASEAN platform and have an ASEAN Directors Registry where, for example, if there was a Malaysian company, and this has actually happened, a Malaysian company looking for a Filipino director to sit on that board, we can source within this registry, because the board talent would then come from the ASEAN countries. So again, this was a step up from the registry we have now to facilitate more regional talent on boards, and actually to provide Asian talents to the rest of the world who may be looking for Asian board talent.
Speaking about talent, Michelle, now the Deloitte Global's 8th edition of Women in the Boardroom, a Global Perspective. Now, this is a report, shows that women hold less than a quarter, or rather 23.3% of board seats globally. What is it like in Malaysia? What can we do to achieve greater gender parity?
Yeah. We've done very well, actually, in Malaysia. In terms of the top 100 PLCs, we've already achieved 31.4% women on boards as of July this year.
That's pretty impressive.
Yes, and that's almost double what it was in 2016. So we've come very far, but that's still the top 100. For the rest of the PLCs, we're just under 30%, so it's about 26.3%, so just under. And bear in mind, these figures can go up and down, depending, because boards, for example, on PLCs have to be refreshed, right? You've got a limit of a 9-year tenure, so it has to be refreshed. So it doesn't mean you keep that over time, but there has to be active addressing of keeping that gender proportion on a board. So we have the 30% Club, which is a business advocacy group, shall I say, which started in the UK. It was founded as well in Malaysia in 2015. And we house them. So they do a lot of the gender-specific activities in terms of improving gender representation in companies and on boards as well. So we're doing a lot on that front.
And I believe the government also has initiatives.
Yes.
Is it all through ICDM as well?
I wouldn't say all of it. Government has come out with some policies. It gets translated into regulation. The last few years, because we do board placement, we've seen a huge increase in the number of women that have been placed on boards. We're very, very happy as well to report that we've even placed first-time women on PLC boards, which is a needle-shifting moment. And because traditionally you see that PLCs will only take on board members who already have PLC experience. Where then do we, get more diversity on board, where you have more women, younger women, new people entering and providing those fresh perspectives, new skill sets? You need to be able to put first-time people onto PLCs as well, and we're seeing that now, so which is a very, very good indication. So we're part of that. We support that 30%. Women on board, but bear in mind that 30% is a minimum. It's not a maximum. You can go up to 50, but obviously we don't want 100% because that's not diverse either. But that's a minimum. And why 30%? Because there's enough, evidence has shown that helps to make a difference on a board.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle, for your insights today. And we've covered quite a bit today, but I hope we get to speak again.
I hope so too.
And go deeper into the issues when it comes to board leadership. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mohana. Pleasure. Thank you.
And that's about all the time we've got for On the Table this evening. We've been talking to Michelle Kaiti Lim, President and Chief Executive Officer at the Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia, ICDM. Now, a repeat of this episode's broadcast can be viewed again at the same time tomorrow and subsequent days on both RTM Click and MyTV's Berita RTM channel, which is also live streaming on YouTube. Till next Thursday, where we'll discuss on another topic of interest. I'm Mona Priya signing off. Good night.